I'm Matt Burnett. I'm the senior pastor, the rector here at Holy Trinity Anglican Church, and we are so happy to have the first Anselm Society pub night here. So thank you so much for being here. We're really honored to have you here. Amen. And this is something of a kickoff. I think you're here because you know something of the Anselm Society, but since it's being recorded, I'll go ahead and do a little blurb straight off the website. Imagine a person who understands the great story so deeply that they can see its meaning in every aspect of their lives. It plays out in the stories they tell their children, the way they feast and grieve and garden, the way they create and cultivate, how they respond to twists and turns in the larger culture. Imagine they understand how to share this rich tapestry of meaning with others. Now imagine a community, a microculture filled with such people. Such communities have withstood and redeemed difficult circumstances for 2,000 years because through everything, they can remember who they are and pass that memory on to their children. The mission of the Anselm Society is a renaissance of the Christian imagination. We exist to cultivate just such a culture within the church in our time. And this amazing organization has put a lot of work into setting up this entire year. This is just the front end of a 12-month effort. And so the idea being that God creates, he speaks, and things come into being. God invites us to sub-create with him from what he has made. What a privilege. And God meets us in that very work. With that being the theme, God as creator and creating, and us as sub-creators and sub-creating, there's an entire year of stories and conversations, of theological treatises and chapters that are going to go into a book, of storytelling, and it's going to happen all through the year. The various themes are just, this one is April, it's resurrection. Christ is risen. The Lord is risen indeed. Hallelujah. Well done. And then there's sort of a number of things that will be happening. So resurrection is one theme, enchantment, image, memory, kairos, subcreation, naming. These are some of the monthly themes that you can participate in all through the next year. There's going to be theological essays that are published every month and an audiobook version of the Imagination Redeemed podcast, which the esteemed Matt Mellema runs for us, right?
Oh, esteemed. Thank you.
And then there'll be a pub night every month. Again, this is the first of many, so sign up for every single one. And then indeed, there'll be more conversations going on in the Believe to See podcast, a live version of which you will see tonight between Matt and Liz. So that'll be a great treat for us. The teachers are folks like Hans Boersma. Boy, we're aiming low there. Hans is amazing. Right? Amazing. Peter Lightheart, amazing. Grace Olmsted, Matthew Clark, amazing. Heidi White, amazing. So the teachers are simply fantastic. And we also have storytellers, expert storytellers like Andrew Latzo, Heidi White, Leslie Bustard, Gina Soderstrom, and Liz Clayton, who I will now hand you off to for the first of these really wonderful storytelling events at our first pub night. Thanks for being here. God bless. I was going to do that. I knew it.
Take it away from you. You got it. There you go. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here, and welcome to this storytelling night where I will be retelling the story of The Secret Garden, first written by Frances Hodgson Burnett, but retold by me because it is an 8-hour story told in its full length. So we're going to keep to about 25 minutes, hopefully. And also bear with me, I'm going to try a few accents tonight, a bit of Yorkshire, and if it's terrible, you can tell me afterward. So, let us begin. When Mary Lennox came to England, she was the most disagreeable-looking child you had ever seen. She had a thin, yellow face, a thin little body, thin, light hair, and a sour expression. Her hair was yellow and her face was yellow because she had been born in India to 2 English parents who were often very ill. And before she'd really ever got to know them, they were taken away in a dreadful disease called cholera that had come to India, taking them both away in the night. Suddenly, there was a wretched business of Mary's life, of finding a new place to live, a new person or people to belong to. It was soon decided that she must go and live across the ocean with her uncle in England, a wealthy, wretched man named Archibald Craven, in his big house called Misselthwaite Manor. Misselthwaite Manor was a house of 600 years of age, which stood on the edge of the moor in Yorkshire, with nearly 100 rooms in it, most of which were shut up and locked up. The house was full of pictures and fine furnishings and things that had been there for ages, but there was no life in it. It was completely dark when Mary first arrived, where she was met by the housekeeper, who began swiftly informing her on all the strictest rules of the establishment. "Now, Miss Mary, you're not to be expected that people will talk to you here. You're to play about and look after yourself. You'll be told what rooms you can go into and what rooms you're to stay out of. There's gardens enough, but you're to not go poking about." Mary was very confused at this entrance. The housekeeper led Mary up many flights of stairs and put her into bed in one of the guest rooms. The door was locked, the housekeeper's footsteps died away, and Mary was alone again, in a strange place called England, and in a strange place very far away from India. The next morning, she was startled awake by the sound of a maid making up the fire in her room. "Who are you?" "Well, I'm Martha, the maid. I work for Mrs. Medlock as the housekeeper's servant, and I'm to look after you and see you have all you need while you're here." "You talk very strange." "I know. I talk too much Yorkshire. But look, Miss Mary, out there at the moor. Oh, I just love it. It's covered with wild and things that smell so sweet. It's fair lovely in the spring and summertime, and it smells of honey with the fresh air, and the sky looks so blue, and the bees are humming and singing. Oh, I wouldn't live away from the moor for anything in the world. Our Dickon, that's my brother, he goes off on the moor himself and he plays for hours. That's how he come to make friends with a pony and a sheep, and the birds comes and eats out of his hand. He charms the foxes and the squirrels and the birds, just as the natives in India charm you, I bet. He plays a very soft tune on his pipe and they come and listen." "Can he really do that?" "Aye. Sometimes he goes away and talks with them in another language I cannot understand. He knows all about eggs and nests, and never so much about gardening. But bless me, look at the time. I must be off." "But what am I to do? Where is my Uncle Craven?" "Well, you won't see him today, that's for sure. No one knows when he's in the house or when he's out of it. He's often away on long trips, and Misselthwaite is more often without its master than it is with it." "What's the matter with him?" "He's got a crooked back which set him wrong all years ago. He was a sour young man, and he got no good of his money or his big house until he got married. And then when his wife died—" "She died?" "Why, that she did, 10 years ago now, and it made him queerer than ever. He cares about nobody, and he won't see people. Most of the time he goes away, and when he's at home he shuts himself up in the west wing." Well, what am I to do?" "Well, if thou goes round outside, you'll come to the kitchen gardens. There's lots of flowers in the summertime, but there's nothing blooming now. One of the gardens is locked up. No one's been in it for 10 years. "Why?" "Mr. Craven had it shut up when his wife died so sudden. He won't let no one go inside. It was her garden. He locked the door and buried the key. He hates that garden." "Why would anybody hate a garden?" "It was Mrs. Craven's special garden, and she made it herself when they were first married. Oh, they'd stay in it for hours together. And she had an old tree with a branch that was bent down, and she used to grow roses over it and sit on it. But one day when she was sitting there, the branch suddenly broke, and she fell to the ground. I'm not quite sure how or why, but she was hurt so badly that the next day she died. The doctors thought Mr. Craven would go out of his mind and die too. That's why he hates it. No one ever goes in it or speaks about it, and you must not ask me any more about it, Miss Mary. Now get yourself off and play, and don't be poking your nose about." It must be said that Mary was neither a dutiful nor obedient child. She had been used to ordering others about her whole life, and why was that to be any different now? She decided she would go out and try to find this garden, which was all locked up. Why would a garden be locked up anyways? What could be the good in locking up a garden? So she began poking about. She could see the tops of trees above a wall when she walked out, and she felt sure they were inside this secret garden. And when she stood still, she saw a robin with a bright red breast sitting on the topmost branch on one of the trees. She heard him chirp and twitter, and then flutter down to a bare flower bed on her side of the wall and start hopping about and pecking things out of the earth. She looked down to where he was pecking, and saw something, a ring of rusty iron or brass. It was an old key. She picked it up. It looks as if it's been buried for years and years. Perhaps it is the key to the garden. What happened at the next moment was magic. Magic like Mary had heard in the stories her ayah used to tell her. The little gust of wind rushed across the walk and blew aside the untrimmed ivy hanging over the wall. Mary jumped toward it and caught it in her hand. She'd seen something behind it. Her hands began to shake in utter excitement and delight. There was a knob of a door. She took the key from her pocket and found it fit. She couldn't believe it. It took 2 hands to pry open that old door, and she threw it back with all of her might and jumped inside, breathing quite fast with excitement, delight, and wonder. She was standing inside the secret garden. It was the sweetest, most mysterious place anyone could imagine. The ground was covered with grass of wintry brown, and there were brown clumps of bushes, which were surely rose bushes, if they were alive. There were tall trees in the garden, and climbing rose vines crept up from one tree to another and made lovely bridges for themselves. Mary was inside that wonderful garden for only an hour, but she felt as if she had found a whole world all her own. She looked in the old border beds and among the grass and found many tiny pale green points shooting up from the ground. If I had a little spade and I could dig somewhere, I might help this garden to come alive. If only someone would teach me. I will ask Martha. She crept out of the garden, locked the door, and was about to rush back to the house when she stopped in her tracks. A boy was sitting under a tree, with his back against it, playing on a rough wooden pipe. His cheeks were red as poppies, and Mary had never seen such blue eyes. Quite near him, a brown squirrel was clinging by and watching him. A cock pheasant was stretching his neck to peep at him, and 2 rabbits were creeping near. They were all drawing near to watch and to listen to his strange pipe song. It was Dickon. He stopped playing when he saw Mary and rose slowly from the ground. "Hello there, I'm Dickon, and I know thou art Miss Mary, Martha told me. See here, I've brought you some seeds and garden tools. Martha told me to do that too. She told me you might need to be planting things. I can help you plant them myself. Where do you want them?" "Oh, Dickon, I don't know much about boys. Can you keep a secret if I told you? It's a great secret. I don't know what I would do if anybody found out. I think I should die. I've stolen a garden. But it isn't mine. It isn't really anybody's. Nobody wants it. Nobody cares for it. And nobody ever goes in it. Perhaps it's dead already. Oh, I don't know. Come with me and I'll show you. It's a secret garden, and I'm the only one in the world that wants it to be alive." And so Dickon was the second person to enter that garden in 10 years and to love it. He stayed in it all afternoon, showing her how to use a trowel and how to weed, and he promised he would keep her secret about the garden and come back every day to help her tend it. Mary was almost too excited to sleep that night. She couldn't wait to be in the garden the next morning with Dickon. But in the night, she was shaken awake by a horrible sound, the sound of someone crying and screaming as if its heart would break. It was horrible. She was terrified. But she must find out who or what it was. So please let it not be a ghost, she thought. She stole through the passageways of the great house, following the sound as best she could, and she reached a room miles away from her own. It was very dark, cold, and sickly smelling. Upon the bed in it lay a boy about her own age, crying and moaning into his pillow. Suddenly he sat bolt upright. "Who are you? Are you a ghost?" "No, I'm not. Are you?" "No. I'm Colin. Who are you?" "Well, I'm Mary Lennox. Mr. Craven is my uncle. He's my father." "Your father? No one ever told me he had a boy." "Where did you come from?" "From my own room. Did no one ever tell you I'd come to live here? I heard someone crying in the night, and I just had to find out who it was." "What are you crying for?" "Because I couldn't go to sleep, and my head ached. I'm always like this, ill and having to lie down. My father won't let anybody speak to me much, and the servants are not allowed to speak about me. If I live, I may be a hunchback, but I shan't live. I've been ill all my life, and I shall soon die." Mary did not know what to say. What a queer house this was. Everything was a kind of secret. Rooms were locked up, and gardens were locked up. "Have you been locked up?" "No. I stay in this room because it tires me too much to move out of it." Does your father come and see you? Sometimes, when I'm asleep, but he doesn't like to see me. Why? Because I remind him of my mother, who is dead. Oh. Have you been here always? Nearly always. Listen, Mary, how old are you? Well, I'm 10 years old. And so are you. How did you know that? Well, because when you were born, the garden door was locked and the key was buried, and that was 10 years ago. What garden door was locked? Who did it? Who buried the key? It was the garden Uncle Craven hates. He locked the door and he knew where the key was buried. I don't. Colin, well, why do you think you won't live? Ever since I can remember, I've been hearing people say it. They think, well, at the time, they knew I didn't understand, and now they think I don't hear them, but I do. Do you want to live? No. Living is very hard. But I don't want to die, and when I feel ill, I lie here and I think about dying, and I just cry and cry. Let's talk about something else. Talk about the garden. Have you seen it? Well, I want to see it. I don't think I've ever wanted to see anything, but I want to see that garden. I want the key dug up. I want the door unlocked. I would make the servants take me in my chair. I would make them open the door. I don't know much good it would do. I doubt the garden would even be alive. No one has cared for it for so long. But perhaps if we found it one day and worked in it every day and tended the earth and planted seeds and made it come alive, perhaps they are all working now and pushing up their pale green shoots because the spring is coming. Is the spring coming? What is it like? You don't see it in rooms like this when you're ill. So Mary began to tell Colin about spring. And from that moment on, she went to visit him every day. She spent the mornings in the secret garden, weeding, hoeing, and planting seeds. And she spent every afternoon in Colin's room talking about gardens, about India, and about Dickon and his animals. Sometimes they read to each other. Colin was a very odd little boy, so full of curiosity and passion, and yet he was going to die. It all seemed so dreadfully wrong. Colin, said Mary one day, why do you think your father hates you? Oh, I don't know if he hates me, but he can't bear to see me. It hurts him too much. They say he nearly went mad when I was born. It was because of my mother. He wouldn't set eyes on me as a baby because of her. He just raved and he said I'd be a hunchback like him and that maybe I'd better die. Oh, Colin, how horrible. Well, I wonder if it would not do you good to go out in the gardens and watch things growing. Go out in the gardens? How could I? I'm going to die. How do you know? Said Mary unsympathetically. She didn't quite like the way he had about talking about dying every day. I've heard it ever since I can remember. I think my father wishes it too. I don't believe he does. I think you just say that to feel sorry for yourself. And if you ever say another word about it again, I'll laugh at you. What you want is to get out of this room, to walk about on the earth and to drink in fresh air. Now, listen, can I tell you a secret? Can I trust you with it, please? Yes, you can. Well, I've talked to Dickon about you, and he's coming to see you tomorrow, and he'll bring his creatures with him. Will he? Will he really? Yes, but that's not all. The rest is better. Listen, there is a door in the garden. I found it. It is hidden under the ivy on the wall. Oh, Mary, shall I see it? Do you think I'll live to see it? Of course you'll see it. Don't be so silly. It's such a beautiful place, Colin. You never saw anything so beautiful, and it has come. What has come? Spring! It's here now. It has come, the spring. Mary ran to the window and she threw open the shutters wide and let the freshness and softness come in and the bird songs come pouring through. Now, drink that in. That's fresh air. Lie on your back and draw in long breaths of it. Feel it in your veins. It shall make you grow strong and healthy, and soon you shall feel as if you could live forever and ever. Forever and ever. Can it really make me feel like that? Yes! And once you're in the garden, you'll feel it more than you ever have before. I've begun working in the garden every morning, and the gardening tools Dickon brought for me, and he's teaching me how to tend the grass, and the grass is greener, and things are sticking up everywhere, and the green buds of leaves are showing. Oh, Mary, do you think I might live to plant things, to tend the earth? Do you think I might live to grow up? Of course you shall. Now get some sleep, and Dickon shall be here to see you tomorrow. Dickon came in the next day with a smile as wide as the sun, bringing a newborn lamb in his arms and a little red fox which trotted by his side. He lifted Colin into his chair, placed the animals in his lap, and then wheeled the chair slowly and steadily out of that dark room, out of that dark, shut-up house, out into the gardens and slowly towards the ivy wall. Now, Colin, this is it. This is where I walked up and looked up and down for the garden, and this is the ivy that the wind blew back. And look, here is the handle, and this is the door. Dickon, push him in quickly. And Dickon did it with one strong, steady push. Colin dropped back against the cushions and covered his eyes with his hands, afraid to look, until they were inside the garden. And there were flowering cherry trees and apple trees whose buds were pink and white, and between the blossoming branches and the canopy of blue sky that was over them, it looked all so wonderful. The wall, the earth, and the trees had a fair veil of tender little leaves creeping all over them. The sun fell warm on Colin's face. He looked so strange and different. I shall get well. I shall get well. Mary, Dickon, I shall get well. And I shall live forever and ever and ever. Mary and Dickon began to work in the garden, and they let Colin watch them do it. They brought him things to look at, buds which were opening, bits of twigs whose leaves were showing just green, and an empty shell of a bird that had just hatched. Delight reigned over all. Mary was a great believer in magic that day. She felt the magic was working all afternoon and making Colin an entirely different boy. It did not seem to be possible he could be the crazy creature who'd screamed and cried into his pillow and moaned about dying. His whole being seemed to change. He looked as if he were made more of flesh instead of ivory or wax. Mary, I'm going to stand. I want to stand up and walk to that tree. Oh, okay. Yes, Colin, I'm sure you can do it. I'm sure you can. Dickon, help him. And so for the first time in many years, Colin stood. Dickon helped him with a steady arm, and the magic, or whatever it was, gave him strength to do it, and he began to walk. They always called it magic, those wonderful months that followed, the radiant months, the amazing ones. Oh, the things which happened in that garden. If you've never had a garden, you might not be able to understand. And if you have had a garden, you will know it would take an entire book to describe all the things that came to pass. At first, it seemed that the green things would never cease pushing their way through the earth, in the grass, in the beds, and through the crevices in the walls. Then the green things began to show buds, and the buds began to open and show color, every shade of blue and purple and every tint and hue of crimson. Flowers which had been tucked away in every inch and hole and corner came bursting out. Magic was pushing and drawing and making things out of nothing. Magic gave Colin a strange feeling of somehow being happy, as if something were pushing and drawing his chest and making him breathe very fast. The magic of the secret garden made him stand up one day and announce to his friends, Mary, Dickon, listen. Just this minute, all at once, I have remembered it myself. When I looked at my hand, digging with the trowel, I just stood up to my feet to see if it was real. And it is real. Look at me. I'm well. And I can dig and walk and run. I'm well. I shall live forever and ever and ever. I shall find out about thousands and thousands of things. I shall find out about people and creatures and everything that grows, like Dickon. And I shall never stop finding out about magic. I'm well. I feel as if I wanted to shout something thankful and joyful. Well, I must sing the doxology, said Dickon. They sing it in church, he said. Mother says she believes the skylarks sing it every morning when they wake up. I've never been to church before. I was always too ill. I'm not now. Oh, well, sing it, Dickon. Sing it. I want to hear it. So Dickon stood out among the trees and the rose bushes and began to sing that beautiful song in a matter-of-fact way in a good, strong voice. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise him, all creatures here below. Praise him above the heavenly host. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen. It is a very nice song, Dickon. I like it. Perhaps it means just what I mean when I want to shout out that I am thankful to the magic. Perhaps they are both the same thing. Sing it again, Dickon. Let us try, Mary. I want to sing it too. It's my song. How does it begin? Praise God from whom all blessings flow. But wait, said Mary. Who is coming in here? Who is it? who was coming in the garden, indeed, was very unexpected. While the secret garden was coming alive, and the two children were coming alive with it, there was a man wandering about in faraway, beautiful places who was decidedly not alive at all. He had not been alive for 10 years. He wandered fjords and mountains and valleys and was never at rest. For 10 years he had kept his mind filled with dark and heartbreaking things. Once he had been young and happy, but a terrible sorrow had fallen upon him, and he had let it in his soul fill itself with blackness and refused to allow any rift of light to pierce through. The man was Mr. Craven. He had seen the most glorious sights and the most beautiful sunrises in his travels, but no light had ever seemed to touch him. Until one day, one strange day, something happened to him which had not happened for nearly 10 years. As he sat overlooking a beautiful mountain stream in the south of France, something inside him seemed to have been unbound and released very quietly. I do not know about the wonderfulness of undiscovered things to be able to even explain it to you. Mr. Craven did not understand it himself. Yet at that very moment, hundreds and hundreds of miles away, his very son in a garden had said the words, "I am going to live forever and ever and ever." Mr. Craven left that valley and went on his wandering way, but strange as it seemed, a black burden seemed to be lifted from him. He began to dream again, and in his dreams the voice of his dear beloved wife, who was long since dead, would come to him, laughing, calling him, "Archie, Archie!" "Lilias, Lilias, where are you?" he said in his dreams. "In the garden," said the voice like a golden flute, "in the garden." The words followed him from dreaming to waking. In the garden? But the door's locked and the key is buried. I will try to find that key. I will try to open that door. But I don't know why. And as if propelled by an unknown force, Mr. Craven made the journey back to Misselthwaite, back to his home, back to that garden. The ivy hung thick over that door. The key was buried under the shrubs. No human being had passed through that portal for 10 lonely years. And yet, as he drew near his home and near those gardens, he heard something inside the garden that he couldn't believe. Sounds of scuffling feet, of lowered voices, of exclamations, smothered joyous cries, and singing. It was actually like the laughter of young things, the laughter and singing of children. What in heaven's name was he dreaming of? What in heaven's name did he hear? Without knowing what he did, he swept back the ivy of that door and threw open the unlocked door. Standing almost immediately before him was a boy, a tall, strong, beautiful boy, with eyes so like his mother's they could not be mistook. "Father! Oh, Father, I'm Colin. I know you can't believe it, and I'm well. You can't believe it. That's all right. But I am. I scarcely can believe it myself. I'm Colin." Mr. Craven did not know what to say. In the garden, he stammered. "Yes, it was the garden that did it, and Mary, and Dickon, and the magic." He said it all so like a healthy boy, his face flushed, his words tumbling over one another. Mr. Craven's soul shook with unbelievable joy. "Are you glad, Father? I hope you're glad. I'm going to live forever and ever and ever." One of the strange things about living in this world is that it is only now and then that one quite knows and is sure that he is going to live forever and ever and ever. One knows it at dawn time, when he goes out and stands under the sky and looks up and watches it slowly changing and flushing and marvelous and unknown things that are happening in the east. One knows it sometimes when she stands by herself in the wood at sunset, and the mysterious deep golden stillness slanting through the branches seem to be saying something over and over that one can never quite hear. Sometimes one knows it by the sound of far-off music when it makes it true. Sometimes by a look in someone's eyes. And sometimes one knows it in a garden. Mr. Craven could barely speak. He put his hands on his boy's shoulders, held him still, and said, "Take me into the garden, my boy, and tell me all about it." Thank you.
All right, well, hello everybody. Couple things, couple housekeeping notes. First of all, this is a live recording. We're on the podcast as we speak. So, I mean, there's no sense in having a live audience if you don't make noise. And also, it's a pub night, so I mean, yeah, like noise, that's a good thing. Also, let's start off by just commending Liz on her Yorkshire accent, right? So Liz, walk us through it. Anytime I try to do a British accent, I sound like Dick Van Dyke and Mary Poppins.
Yes.
So, what makes Yorkshire different from the other accents?
Oh gosh, Yorkshire is, well, I've watched a lot of British TV, so my roommate who's here can attest to that. Yes, it's very, it's so much about holding your mouth, and it feels very much in the back of your throat, and you got to keep it back in the back of your throat and open the back of your mouth wide. It's weird.
Back of your mouth wide.
Yes.
Okay. Nailed it. So let's start by talking about some of the big themes, and we can go into some more of the specific areas. So obviously, as you heard Father Matt say, we have a different theme each month with the Anselm this year. In the Why We Create series, and this month's theme is resurrection, appropriately enough. So y'all may have noticed a couple different types of resurrections in the story, but Liz, tell us about the theme of resurrection, how it plays out in Secret Garden.
Yeah, for sure. So I love this story. I read it when I was, I think, 12 or 13, and had so much about gardening and flowers and blooming and things had never been quite alive to me like they were in that story. So for me, I think there's many different, and it's too bad in some ways that I had to bring down the story as short as I did and cut out characters and scenes and things, but there are three main resurrections which happen in the story. One is Mary's own kind of resurrection of coming alive. She comes from India, from a very sad upbringing and not very connected to her parents, and just surrounded by death and by so many things, and then taken completely away to a different part of the world. And then she has to kind of figure out how to be in the world and how to grow and how to watch things come alive again in the garden. So there's her resurrection that's happening. And then of course there's Colin's resurrection, which is the most prevalent one. And I love, Colin is one of my favorite characters in the story, and I was so sad I had to cut out so many different parts about his tantrums that he would throw. Just ordering servants around and being offended because people didn't delicately walk on the water of he's going to die. And so, and I find it very funny, but Colin has this complete resurrection transformation moment of kind of realizing, and this, thematic element of, I'm going to live, and I'm going to live forever and ever. And so there's his that definitely happens. And then there's Mr. Craven's, his father, who I think has the most probably profound resurrection story almost of the whole story, because in many ways he's abandoned his family. He's abandoned the one child that he can love in the world, and because he's lost in his own grief and in his own despair and in the darkness of that, which is very understandable, but he has no courage in that moment and he leaves. And I think his part in the story is so wonderful in many ways, because resurrection, I love that, is connected with both father and son. Like, that's just theologically very profound to me, that like in one moment when a son is having a resurrection moment, a father in a different part of the world is also having that moment. And I just love that. I think that's incredible. So.
Well, far be it for me to contradict the storyteller, but I count 5 resurrections.
Oh, okay. Well, do add.
So there you go. There you go.
That's another one. You're right.
So there's Mary,
yes.
There's Colin, there's Mr. Craven, there's the garden, and there's the world, because it's spring.
This is true. That's true. The whole world. Wow, those are 2 big ones I left out.
Very big ones. Only the world.
Yeah, just the world. It's fine.
But one of the things that I noticed for Colin, Mary, and the garden in particular, they all seem to have the same reason why they sort of go dead or dormant for so long, and that's because of neglect. Like for Mary, when she's in India, her parents are like, bigwigs over there, and they mainly neglect her. When they eventually die of cholera, there's a scene in the book where the British soldiers discover her, and they're like, oh, I didn't even know they had a kid.
Yes,
That's weird.
Yeah.
Same thing with Colin. His dad's always, off, avoiding him. And then with the garden, it's just been left dormant for so many years. So how does neglect play a role in the story, and what's the solution from the neglect?
Yes, the solution for neglect is really cultivation. And we see that in many ways. One, I didn't get to it as much in my story, but Martha, the maid, is this wonderful character who's very comical and just very life-giving and effervescent. She's very bubbly. And she becomes kind of a nurturing, almost mother-like role to Mary, even though she's probably just maybe 5 years older than her. So there's nurturing is happening. I think that really begins to work upon Mary's heart and really foster a sense of belonging when neglect has really been there. Dickon, too, is such a nurturer. Oh my goodness, how he nurtures the animals and he nurtures the garden. And I think one of the most profound parts in this story, too, is this whole element of cultivation, of planting seeds and of digging and of weeding and of tending the earth. Like that's such a prevalent, wonderful theme throughout all of it. And I think that, like, not only being able to do that to the garden, like not only like taking away or not neglecting the garden anymore, but like really cultivating it, that happens. But also in the same way, that kind of work begins to work upon Mary and upon Colin. So the work of cultivation is almost in its own way nurturing back to her and to Colin and to the world, you know? So yeah, I think those elements are very interesting.
Yeah, and I like the distinction you drew between nurturing as opposed to just care, because when Mary and Colin both receive excellent care in a sense, like when Mary's in India, she has this whole staff of servants that's catering to her every whim and is afraid to cross her. And same thing with Colin, whole staff of servants, trying to avoid the tantrums, trying to, not talk about death too much, but sometimes, and, whatever. But that's different from the nurturing. Like when Mary's parents die, the servants leave. And you don't get the sense that any of Colin's servants super duper care about him in the long term. Because,
well, they're afraid of him.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, which is interesting too, because I think you have to cross that threshold of fear in order to nurture. And you see the characters, particularly of Martha and Dickon, they do that. They're not afraid of these very strange, very privileged children who are very angry and sad. They want to breach that threshold of fear, because in many ways, Martha and Dickon, they're both siblings that they come from, like a poor family of about 8 children, and they're always kind of struggling and trying to make ends meet, but they have a mother, Mrs. Sowerby, who's so full of life and nurturing and goodness, and that just kind of, for them, bleeds over. And of course we would love this person, even though they're not easy to love. So yeah, you're right, that is a very interesting thing there for sure.
All right, so Danielle, I'm sorry. Danielle was talking about the story with me earlier, and she mentioned that she views Dickon as a kind of Christ figure in the story.
Yes.
So do you agree, disagree? She's right there if you want to argue about it.
Great, I'll just talk to you. Yes, I think he is in many ways. It's very subtle, and I think it's importantly so that way. And I think Dickon is kind of this almost, not a forefront character. He's definitely more in the background, but he makes so many different things come alive. And even his playing his wonderful pipe to the animals, and they're not afraid of him, and wanting to help Mary plant seeds. And then even his profound connection, spiritual connection to, as soon as Colin says, oh, well, I want to do something joyful, or he's like, well, we must sing the doxology. That's what we must do. And I just love that. I think that's incredible, because he's so connected to the spirit of, yes, thankfulness is then giving glory to God. And we do that through song, and we do that through tending a garden. So I think I agree with Danielle completely that Dickon is a very Christ-like character in more ways than I can count. So, yeah.
So, related to the Christ character, I definitely think there's a big theme here of the way that the environment can shape you. So they talk obviously about the garden and the magic of the garden, which we'll get to in just a minute. But there's also a lot of Garden of Eden parallels with the garden. Let's go back to before Mrs. Craven died. Mrs. Craven literally falls, and after her fall, they are all locked out of the garden. Yeah. And the garden sort of goes dead and dormant, and then when they come back and cultivate it, you even have Dickon is this character who, he can tame the animals. So the animals are walking around as like friends in this garden area. Yeah. So what other ways can you see that the garden symbolism playing in?
Many ways. I mean, I think the garden's genesis is very much Mr. Craven and his wife, both in the garden. They cultivate it. They love it. They spend hours there together. She grows things in it. And then very interesting too how that piece and then the great fall then it affects so many different things, where Mr. Craven in many ways begins to hate the garden, begins to hate things that were created in a perfect and beautiful way. It begins to hate even, like, you might say, the created order of things, and then completely abandons it. And I find that very interesting because, I mean, once that happens, once you have a great fall or a great sad, is what I like to call it, it dismantles everything, and it breaks relationships between him and his son, and between, him and his niece even, like, who's come to live with him, and he's not there. I mean, there's so much about that. And then I think, too, with the garden, I wish I could have gone into it more. Earlier on in the story, there's a bird, this robin, that, like, directs her to the garden, and he's a very important character in the story, and I was so sad to have to give him more of a minor part. But that's something very interesting, which is, like, a different sort of creature bringing someone back into life again, like an unexpected creature bringing someone back in towards life again, and showing someone a key that was locked. I mean, I think the key symbolism is also very interesting. Like, we've locked the key to our own happiness, to our own, like, wholeness in many ways because of what was broken and what was lost in many ways. So yeah, I could go on for a long time, but yeah, there's, I think, a lot of things.
Yeah, and a point related to that, and that I think this gets into, like, the key imagery too, it's the idea of a secret. There are a lot of secrets here. Again, there's some Mary and Colin parallels. Mary's parents kind of keep her secret. Colin's dad keeps him such a secret. Mary doesn't know she has a cousin, and Colin doesn't know he has a cousin, so that's pretty big secret keeping. Then obviously we have the secret garden. Yeah. This is a scene you had to cut for time, but Colin has, like, a picture of his mother that he keeps locked away, hidden, doesn't want anyone else to see. Yeah. That almost seems connected to the resurrection theme. It's like these secrets that need to be revealed.
Yes. Yeah, and in many ways, I would say, in addition to Dickon being kind of a Christ-like character throughout, Mrs. Craven, who's died, is very much central to the story of unlocking many things, because she's, the pivotal point of when she died, so many things went wrong, and even Colin, like, hates this portrait of his mother and keeps it locked behind the doors. And then the servants in the house, in many ways, they barely talk about her. And so it's just this interesting theme of, like, how many things in our own lives do we, like, conceal that need to be talked about, that need, like, are the key to freedom and to new life and to recovery and to so many of these things. So yeah, I think you're right. There is, like, interesting parallels too, because secret can be taken in many ways. Secret's like a precious and beautiful thing, and then a secret is also a sickly thing. And so you're always kind of trying to figure out in the story, like, which secret is a bad one to keep and which is a good one. Because at the end, when Mr. Craven comes home, this great secret of new life, of resurrection of his son, is the best secret in the world. And that reminds me of another best secret in the world of a son coming to life again. And I just think, yeah, that's amazing how you kind of get to work with that throughout the story inwardly. So
yeah, and another way that they work is through the magic, and you kept it deliberate, which I think is in keeping with the book about the magic, or whatever we should call it. Yes, and kind of being a little vague at it. But there's a lot of dimensions of the magic, right? Like, one of the areas is just in nature. I think it's really significant. First of all, the author goes very clear to talk about, like, the healing effect of, like, the English moors on Mary. Yeah. I think it's significant that Martha, you gave her the lines like, I can't imagine living anywhere else. This is where I belong. This is my home. Yeah. And Dickon spends all of his time on the moors. He's sort of a creature who's very much acclimated to it. Like, he's at one with the moors. Yes. And taking it a step further, Mary only finds the key because the robin points it out to her. It's almost like the nature is helping along in that way.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think in many ways, for me, when I first read the story, and then especially now going over it, I think so much even culturally about our world today, which is so disconnected from nature, and so much about, magic is talked about throughout the story in many different ways, but nature and the beauty and it talks about the magic, like pushing and pulling and lots of different things that are going on, and breath that's coming back in, and someone who's turning from wax or ivory to, like, real flesh. Like, there's so much happening there. And I think in many ways, it draws me so much back to, especially now in springtime, of how much magic is actually happening in our world that we just honestly are not seeing because we insist upon locking ourselves in our rooms and saying we are going to die, And I just think it's so interesting, like, if we spent so much more time sitting in, breathing in the fresh air, being in the world and seeing what glories come through creation. The scriptures talk about how God's invisible, attributes are seen through creation. And I think we repeat that, but we don't believe that as much, and we don't spend as much time in the world and in nature, like soaking that in. Like, I love how Mary talks about drink in the fresh air, you'll begin to believe that you will live forever and ever. And I think of how many of us have had those moments where we're been hiking, or we've been in a beautiful place, and you just have one of those magic, life is incredible and beautiful and eternal and all of those things. And I think that's a consistent theme that nature in the garden in many ways is always bringing out and is always ringing true to. Like, the garden never lies, that spring is coming, that resurrection is coming, that all things will be made new again. And I just get so excited.
So story along those lines. So I'm stealing this from you again, Danielle. I'm sorry. So a little bit ago, my 4-year-old, he has like some string cheese that he's putting in his mouth like this. And Danielle mentions that, you look like a walrus. And my 4-year-old's like, well, what's a walrus? Oh, yeah. So Danielle gets a picture on the phone. And when my 4-year-old sees the walrus, he just starts laughing. He's like, I like a walrus. I want to meet him someday. And just laughing, just overwhelmed with joy, like, there's a thing called a walrus in the world. And it's amazing.
Yes.
And you see that with Colin here.
Yeah.
Early on when they're describing Colin, just even like his complexion, they use words like waxen, stone, like dead things. Yeah. Then you get him out for like the first time, and he gets to see spring, he gets to see growth, he gets to see nature, he gets to see the garden through these fresh eyes. Yes. So he can sort of perceive the magic that's always there, but the rest of us don't even notice.
Yes, because he's completely new to it. I think one of the most profound parts in the story is he's like, I don't see spring much in these dark rooms. And you're like, oh my, I bet you wouldn't. And just imagining, what would it be like to experience spring for the first time in his whole life? And then for that to then equate over into, what does that mean for him? It means I'm going to live. If I'm here in spring and it's all real and it's all true, it's all real true, that means I'm going to live, and I'm going to live forever and ever. And I think that it is a complete transformation for him, because he gets hints of it while inside of his room of, could I live? Could that be a thing? Could I not die? Maybe. But that's not a reality for him until he's there and until he's in the garden. And I think in many ways his own delight and wonderment and complete newness to it makes newness for Mary all over again, makes it all over again in some ways, probably for Dickon, who, knows these things like the back of his hand, but it's wonderful to watch again, and then makes that completely new and real for his father when he comes back, because spring and resurrection has done so much for his son that he comes back to the garden and to the wonders of the world, which he's been totally blind to for 10 years. And he's been in the most beautiful places in the world, and yet it's coming back to that garden, and to his son, who sees all of those things new, that his eyes are opened.
I love the image of Mr. Craven with, you have him like the hunchback. You almost think of Christian Pilgrim's Progress, weighed down by all of his troubles and concerns, finally coming back at the end. It's a theme that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. It's this theme of death versus living forever. So you see it at various points of the story, and so it's sort of this pair of paradoxes, where at the beginning it's Colin when he's mopey, he's in this room all by himself, he's just thinking about death, and there's questions for Mary like, well, do you want to die? I don't want to die, but I don't want to live either. This paradox, I don't want to live, but I don't want to die. But then when he gets into the garden and he starts his resurrection, he's like, I'll live forever and ever and ever. And when we were talking about this before we started recording, you told me something along the lines of, let's see, you said something like, it's hopeful, not really true, but true.
Well, so yes, explain. And I was even, verbally processing as I said that probably. But I think in many ways the story, Colin's story and Mary's story, and in many ways Mr. Craven's story, is all defined by death in many ways. The death at the beginning of Mrs. Craven, the death of Mary's parents. Colin's narrative for his whole life is, I'm going to die. My mother died. My father's never here. I'm sick. I'm going to be a hunchback like him. My father said that I had better die, rather than be a hunchback, so I'm going to. And that's just like a deep-seated belief. And then for Mr. Craven, death is also so prevalent in his life because of his wife's death. Nothing is alive anymore, and he won't let anything be alive, and he can be in the most beautiful and alive places in the world, and yet he's completely dead to it. And so when Colin has that moment, and it's his own words, it's not anyone else that gives him this idea, he comes to like, could I live? Like, is that a possibility? And then, could I live forever and ever and ever? And that's a reality like better than even he could imagine. And so it is interesting because in human terms, Colin will one day die.
Well, this book was published in 1911 and he was 10, so
yes,
if you do the math.
It's true. I mean, it's fictitious, it's possible, but yes, it's true. And so that is a reality, like knowing that as a construct of the story is interesting because then embedded within that is this declarative statement. And in many ways, and in most ways, and in all ways, it is a true statement because in his sense that he means it, or as we would know it, like we are going to live forever and ever and ever. And to him, in his small 10-year-old brain, like that just means I'm going to live. But what would it mean for us then to live forever and ever? And that begins within him like this resurrection of, oh, I'm going to, like the sky's the limit. And then at the same moment for his father, miles and miles away, that begins a new story, a new chapter of living again and living forever and ever. And like that being a possibility, and the garden which comes alive again and again and again for many years afterwards. So it's a very interesting thing because I think at that point in the story, even if it's not true in real terms, it's speaking to the reader, to the viewer in ways that is true beyond all of our years, that is the truest statement of the book. And yeah, I think that's just something very interesting that even within his own, construct, like he can only understand that as, oh, that means I'm going to live and I'm not going to die. We know that as something so much greater, that we are going to live forever and ever, and that death does not define our story anymore.
All right, so just a couple closing thoughts because we're winding down with our time. First of all, this is a novel that you condensed down into like a 25-minute story. What were your hardest cuts?
Oh gosh, so many. There's a wonderful gardener named Ben Weatherstaff.
I had a feeling he'd be coming up, yeah.
So sad. He is gruff, and he was one who tended to the garden and like climbed on this ladder. He's very old and has rheumatism, and he would climb on this ladder and go and trim the rose bushes every year for Mrs. Craven because she had loved him and wanted him to. And so he did for years without telling anyone. So he had actually been in the secret garden when everyone else had not, and then was unable to for a year. And there's this great moment when the children are all in there, and he like climbs up on the ladder and sees them inside, and is like, "What are you doing down there?" And he's so upset. And then they're terrified but excited. It's this whole thing. And so I love Ben Weatherstaff because when Dickens sings the doxology, Ben is listening and watching, and when Colin stands in the garden, that's the first time Colin actually does stand, is when Ben Weatherstaff's, peeking over the wall, and then he's like, "What are you doing down there?" And he's like, "You come down here now, I am the master of this house." And then he's like, I'm going to stand up. And he stands up in the garden, and Ben Weatherstaff comes in and is just shocked and amazed, and he remembers Mrs. Craven and how he looks so much like his mother, and he begins to cry, and it's this beautiful moment, and I was sad I had to leave it, take it out.
Well, if anyone wants to see all of those Ben moments, I would encourage you to read the book.
Please read the book. It's yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Liz. That was such a good job with the story. Great talk. Thank you. And a great Yorkshire accent, too.
Oh,
so, everyone, let's give her a hand.
Very poor.
Thank you all.